Okay. Hopefully that's working for everyone. That's live. Cool. Excellent. So thanks everyone for joining my session, which is what's up at Adoptium. The kind of goal of this session is to walk people through some recent changes that have happened at the project, notably the move to the Eclipse Foundation that happened recently, but also just to talk more generally about your sort of OpenJDK options. And hopefully by the end of this session, people should have a slightly clearer idea. And also, I think we're going to run a brief Q&A at the end of this session. So I'll be willing to answer any questions and answers. So to say, what's up at Adoptium? My name is George Adams. I am the co-founder of the Adopt OpenJDK project. I am currently the chairman of the Eclipse Adoptium steering committee. I'm also the strategic representative for Microsoft as part of that. I am a Java champion, and my sort of day-to-day role, the one that pays the bills, is that I'm a senior software engineer at Microsoft. So just to kind of briefly walk people through what we're going to cover in this session, we're going to talk a little bit about terminology. Excuse the crazy cat. I'm going to show you a kind of OpenJDK workflow that we would typically work through. I'm going to talk a little bit about vendor distribution, differences of vendors. I'm going to talk to you about Adopt OpenJDK. I've put out a poll, so I'm hoping that people are answering that away. I can kind of see this on a separate screen. So, oh no, I haven't gone live. Hello. Okay, I think we've gone live now. Cool. Okay, so I'll go again. So hi everyone. My name is George Adams, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Adoptium, notably the move to the Eclipse Foundation, and I'm going to walk you through some recent changes. So first thing to talk to you about is my name. I am George Adams. I am the Adopt OpenJDK co-founder. I founded that a while back, I think 2016, with some other people. I'm also the chairman of the Adoptium committee, steering committee, and the strategic representative for Microsoft. I'm also a Java champion, and the job that pays the bills each month, I'm a senior software engineer at Microsoft, a part of the Java engineering team. So I'm just going to kind of briefly walk you through the content that we're going to cover in this session. So I'm going to walk you through terminology. I think it's always important when we talk about OpenJDK vendors to talk about terminology, make sure that people can all sort of understand what we're talking about here. I'm going to show you a sample OpenJDK workflow. I'm going to walk you through vendor distribution and the differences between each vendor. I'm going to talk to you about Adopt OpenJDK. And I've got a poll open, so I'm hoping that people will start filling in the poll results. I'm really interested to find out who here is using Adopt OpenJDK, Eclipse Temurin. If you aren't using Adopt or Temurin, please do use the chat box here. I really want to see people's answers. I want to know what distribution you are using. Even if you can give us a one-line justification as to why you use it, that's really, really useful to me. So please do put your answers into that chat box. We're going to also talk about Eclipse Adoptium, so the new Adopt OpenJDK project, and I'm going to walk you through a build test pipeline and talk about migration. So let's get started. So terminology, I think, is really crucial whenever we're doing a session like this. The key thing I always hear people say is, where can I download OpenJDK? But technically that isn't quite correct. OpenJDK itself is the source project. It is the reference implementation of the Java SE standard. It's source only. That's the key thing. So if you want to download it and run Java, you need an OpenJDK binary. And that's a Java development kit that has been built from the OpenJDK source. And of course, where do you go to get that binary? Well, you get it from a provider. So that is a vendor, Oracle, Adoptium, whatever it is, who build that OpenJDK binary and provide it through websites, APIs, Docker files, whatever it is. So there's loads of distributions out there. I think I have covered nearly everyone on this slide. If I haven't, again, please do use the chat box. I'm keen to find out what we're using out there. So I've put Eclipse Temarin in bold, partly because I'm biased, but also because this session mainly talks about Eclipse Temarin. But there are several other good vendors out there. There's obviously Oracle's JDK, Java, as we all know it. Amazon, for some time, has been building their Corretto distribution. If I talk to customers that are using AWS, I always recommend they use Amazon Corretto because you get commercial support included. Azul Zulu, Azul is a company that entered the market quite some time ago now and have built up quite a reputation building OpenJDK binaries from source. They're also big contributors to the OpenJDK project themselves. And I think they've taken off a lot since the Oracle license change. We also have Bellsoft. You can get from Linux distros. So that's like, if you're on Ubuntu, you can do apt-get install OpenJDK. This sort of way is probably the lowest recommendation. Please do not use those. I'll save that one for another talk, but typically they aren't particularly well maintained. You can have the Microsoft build of OpenJDK. I have to obviously talk about that because I work for Microsoft. So again, if you're using Microsoft Azure, then Microsoft build of OpenJDK is the recommended way. You get commercial support. And the same applies with Red Hat build. You have SAP Machine, which is built by SAP. Again, very long-term, heavy committed to the OpenJDK project. And also Alibaba provide a build called Dragonwell, which again has their cloud optimizations. So you kind of see a general theme here. Most of these vendors have their own cloud, and they are providing cloud optimized versions of OpenJDK for their cloud, for their customers. But there are a few other kind of more unique ones in there. So let's talk a little bit about Adopt OpenJDK. So we've got to go all the way back to 2003 to understand the history. Back in 2003, when Java was still young and fun, the Adoption group was founded. One of the big challenges that people had at this time was contributing to the OpenJDK source code. If you had enhancements that you wanted to make, you had to have sponsors, you had to have your company sign the contributor agreement. It was a really complicated process with several hurdles to jump over. And so the Adoption group was founded to try and help people, support them to get their fixes into the OpenJDK distribution. If you zoom forward to 2016, IBM created a project called Get OpenJDK. This was something that I worked on at the time when I was working for IBM. And the goal here was to provide a vendor-neutral, free-to-use, open-source Java distribution. Now, I've kind of said two things that don't quite sound right there. Vendor-neutral and open source aren't things that can be done with an in-source project. And so, of course, IBM had to donate that project, open source it to somewhere else. And so the Adoption group was chosen. And that was really kind of where Adopt OpenJDK, as we know it today, became real. So in 2017, that was opened up. Adopt OpenJDK started doing builds in the open. Everything was done with big build farms. And that was really the idea here. So you go forward another year, 2018, the project was really growing fast. It had 1 million downloads in less than a year, actually. And I think that was a real testament to the success of the project and future sort of direction it was going to be taking. We knew that there was a space in the market here, and we knew that people were interested. So we go forward again another year. We had 30 million downloads, huge numbers. But actually, the thing that I really care about is that we had 23 sponsors on the project, big commercial entities putting money, resources, infrastructure into the project to ensure that it stays around long time, for the longest time possible. But as with any open source project, it very quickly got too big. I'll talk a little bit about this later. And so in 2020, with more than 200 million downloads, and that number's subsequently doubled, by the way, Adopt decided to join the Eclipse Foundation. We looked at loads of different vendors. We looked at lots of different software foundations. We looked at the Linux Foundation, the Apache Foundation. But we felt the Eclipse Foundation was the right home for this, particularly that they worked with Jakarta very recently, which was a huge, huge feature. And they had the legal experience in dealing with TCKs, talking about OpenJDK. They got it, and they really understood the project. So The idea of Adoptium and GDK was to provide business-ready binaries. And so, as I say, it wanted to be broad platform coverage. We wanted to be professionally tested, really clear and transparent, notably, support policy. And it needed to be backed by the major Java vendors and the Java community as an ecosystem. And as I say, that today has had over 410 million downloads, which is just an astonishing count of downloads when you think about it. The kind of key goals here, well, there's 3 rules that Adoptium and GDK lived by. The first one was that the technical steering committee was in the open. So there were no hidden away meetings, the committee, all the minutes were published, everything was transparent. The whole project is open source. It all sits in GitHub. And all of the conversations that go on happen in Slack. And that Slack is completely free. Anyone can sign up to it. I've got the link at the end of this. And actually, one of the big takeaways here is I really want people to join that Slack. So, as I mentioned, running an open source project at scale is really, really hard. For starters, with more than 410 million downloads, just maintaining a download server gets incredibly expensive, technically challenging, maintaining CDNs across all the regions that we were hitting. I think there's only about 4 countries left in the world that have never downloaded an Adoptium and GDK binary. We had over 200 dedicated machines, and that is an enormous effort to be patching them, maintaining them, keeping them secure, particularly with secure software development that we now, put at the top of focus for software development. It's really hard to look after those and maintain them. We also had over 100 repos in GitHub, and all of those needed patching, security fixes, maintenance. And so we decided that with the great success of the group, that we had to move forward to a foundation. And I think one of the biggest challenges here was that we, as part of the deal, had to rebrand. We kind of slightly borrowed a trademark from Oracle. For those that haven't worked it out, Adoptium and GDK was slightly confusing. We felt it wasn't the right approach going forwards. But rebranding is hard. When you've built up a brand, and I'm not going to claim that we quite built up the brand that Facebook had, but when you suddenly pull that away from people and send them to a new location, that takes a lot of work. A lot of migration work was required, and just spreading the message. And that's partly why I'm here talking today. So, as I say, welcome Adoptium. So Adoptium is the working group at Eclipse Foundation. So for those that are kind of not familiar with the structure, you have a working group and then you have project underneath that working group. So you can kind of see Eclipse Adoptium as the equivalent of Jakarta EE. And we had some really strong founding members. And actually, since subsequently, we've got more members into the working group and steering committee. So it continues to grow and evolve. And we're always interested to start conversations with companies about how they can join, particularly the enterprise users of Java. We want to talk to you. So if people here work for enterprises and they're using Eclipse Temurin or Adoptium and GDK, I really want to hear from you. So I'll just sort of paste this up. I'm not going to do the boring thing and read it out, but I'll just leave it up for a moment. This is the kind of overall motto that the Adoptium project runs by, and this is what we aim to do. So one of the main sort of exciting things was that we had a new brand, and as you've kind of seen from the slideshow, we had to build that brand up and create new logos, names, register all the trademarks. It's a lot of work, and I was really, really proud with the kind of the output that we had here. For those that are sort of familiar with the old Adoptium and GDK logo, I think I created it on a plane on the way to the launch event using PowerPoint. So this thing was not designed very well, whereas we had proper graphic design people working on a rebrand, and that was such an exciting thing for our project. And we had lots of projects that sit underneath it. So as I said, Eclipse Adoptium is the top level project. Below that, you have Eclipse Temurin, which is the name of the OpenJDK binaries. Eclipse Aquavit, which is the open source set of tests that we use, that we run. We have Mission Control, which provides open source builds of Java Mission Control. And we also have a project that contains incubation and also a migration project that was very recently started, which aims to migrate people or help migrate people from Java 8 to 11 and 11 to 17 and possibly even beyond. And so with all these new projects came a lot of tasks. For starters, we had to migrate all of these repos and migrate those 200 machines that we had to the Eclipse Foundation. We had to make a new brand, as I've mentioned. One of the key goals here was improving the user experience for our consumers. We knew that this was a gap that we'd never really achieved at Adoptium from GDK. And the other thing was trying to lower the hurdle. Open source projects are so daunting to rock up and contribute to. And so we wanted to make it a friendlier environment. We wanted to make it easier. We wanted to improve our documentation. Now, the number one question I get asked every time I go to conferences is, why Temurin? Temurin's a really weird name. Well, there's two reasons. The first reason, and I ask you to brace yourselves here, is this. Temurin is an anagram for runtime. Yes, this is what happens when you let engineers come up with names. But I think it's quite a nice homage. And I think even more crucially, Temurin, which is the chemical compound that you're seeing on the left, is the most similar to coffee. And so I think that's also a really nice peek here. The chemical composition of Temurin is very similar to coffee. And of course, coffee cup, Java, we all know the history there. And one of the really new exciting things that came as part of the move was that we had to build a new website. And this website, for those that use the Adoptium for JDK website, you're probably really frustrated. It's really poorly written. And this website is smooth and sleek. And you can download the binaries easily. We have a huge amount of documentation. I'll talk to you about documentation in a minute. But we also got lots of contributors to come along and help us build this out. It's based on, it's using Gatsby and React. We didn't go for a Java-based website for those that always ask, but I'm really excited to show this off. And as I mentioned, we use AsciiDoc for all of the documentation we have. For those that aren't familiar with AsciiDoc, it's very similar to Markdown. It's just a kind of extended version. It allows us to do a little bit more formatting. And one of my favorite things about the new documentation is that at the bottom of every single documentation page, we have this lovely bar with all these pretty faces called contributors. And so the idea here is that we want to lower the hurdles. So if you go and use our documentation and something doesn't quite work out, we want people to go and fix it. And the easiest way to do that was to provide a button at the bottom of the page that says edit this page. And that takes you straight to GitHub. You just make your text change in AsciiDoc, click create pull request. And if we merge that change, your face magically appears. And I really love this because it's a really nice sort of homage to the community, and it's a way of thanking people for continuing to improve our documentation. So enough about websites. So let's talk a little bit about builds and binaries. So one of the main things that Eclipse Adoptium has is an open Jenkins CI. Anybody can go to this website, ci.adoptiumgdk.net. And this website is where we do all of the builds of Java. And then I must admit, I've been slightly naughty here. They aren't always green. Most of the time, there's lots of red. This was a good day. I screenshotted. I think you'll find the one just outside the screenshot was red. But this is a typical build. So we have a folder called JDK8 or JDK11, JDK17. Inside those folders are all the individual builds for the different architecture and operating system. So this is kind of what the test pipeline looks like. We have the open JDK source, which is mirrored down. That's then fed into the build server, e.g. Jenkins. And we have some Adoptium build scripts that we pump into the side, which kind of are a wrapper around the source. They allow us to define, configure variables, set up the environment correctly. And then what's spit out of that build server is the binary, the OpenJDK distribution, like I talked about earlier. And that gets pushed up to adoptium.net, gets pushed to our API, Docker files, homebrew casks, you name it, it's pushed there. So one of the things I always like to show off is our supported platforms. I'm not entirely sure, don't hold me to this, but I believe that Adoptium still provides the broadest range of platforms. We obviously provide the Mac OS ones, the Linux ones, Windows. We started building Mac OS for M1 and M2 so that people on their newer Macs can get native binaries rather than using Rosetta. But we also provide builds for IBM platforms like AIX and mainframe. We build Solaris and Solaris Spark, which are really, really hard to get in a kind of secure data center that we can actually run these builds on. And that's one of the big challenges here. And one of the biggest costs that we have as a project is securing this hardware and essentially getting it in a secure environment rather than having a Solaris Spark server running on your desk at home. So sources, let's talk about source. So all of the builds we do are based on OpenJDK. They are like for like identical to OpenJDK provided by nearly every other vendor, other than maybe some very small changes like vendor naming, very small set of patches. So all of the OpenJDK repositories are mirrored into the Adoptium GitHub org. At that point, we then apply any patches that we're interested in. But the key thing I point out with patches is that we're not interested in additional functionality. So typically, the only kind of patch that we might apply is a premature backport, for example. So very recently, we brought in the backports to provide native Alpine muzzle-based builds of OpenJDK on 8, 11, and 17. And so whilst they were slowly getting backported upstream, we brought them down earlier to have them ready. And so once we've built those builds, we then have tests. And so Adoptium provides the test suite Aquavit. And Aquavit is the open source test suite, which comprises of tests from all over the Java ecosystem. And these tests are really interesting. I'm going to break these down. So a lot of these tests were contributed by IBM at the time when they created the Get OpenJDK project. But also there's a whole load from application and frameworks, all sorts of really interesting ones. And I'll show you some of these. And these tests can be used to verify any OpenJDK build. So this isn't just, testing Temurin. We could test Azure Zulu, Oracle Java with this test suite. So here's a kind of rough idea here. And there's some quite large numbers to sort of prepare yourself for this. So typically on nightly and release, we have 58 platforms. And by platforms, what we're talking about is Windows x64, Windows x86, AIX, Linux. The numbers are huge. They grow out quickly, and we have JREs, JDKs. And they're 6 versions that we typically build at a single time. So that might be 8, 11, 17, 18, 19, which we just started releasing last week, maybe even TIP. And each one of those has 250,000 tests. So if you actually work out the maths, I promise you I did run a calculator here. For every single release that we do, we have more than 87 million tests run, which is a bonkers number, horrifyingly large. And I think that really shows the quality and the thoroughness of the testing that the OpenJDK project provides. So a typical Aquavit test suite looks like this. So you have your build that comes out of the CI, and that goes into test. So test contains several groups, and that's OpenJDK, which is the upstream JT-reg tests. We also have functional tests, system tests, which are the ones contributed by IBM. We have external tests, which are like micro-profile TCKs, perf, which contains benchmarks, and also the JCK, or the TCK as it's known, which is the Java Technology Compatibility Kit, which is the thing you have to run to prove compatibility with the JSR. So as you see, you can kind of get an idea of the breakdown of the tests here. There's roughly 6,500 tests in OpenJDK, roughly 20,000 in functional system, incredibly more than 125,000 in external, 80 or so benchmarks, and obviously the TCK. So I want to talk a little bit about the external suite here, because this is the really interesting one. So as I mentioned earlier, we run a whole load of other people's micro-profile TCKs. We run lots of application testing. And so this is a typical test job that we have. So what we do is we spin up a Docker container. And let's take Derby as our example, because that's easy. So we install the JDK, and then we go and check out the Derby repo against the latest tag. And we actually build Derby from source, and then we run their CI tests against our JDK, and then collect that result and return it. Now, people always ask why we do this. Well, the main reason you do this is it allows us to detect breaking changes in our JDK before shipping it. So we can actually guarantee, that Derby and other major frameworks and libraries will work before we ship the JDK. And I think that's a really unique offering that Temurin provides here. So I've talked a lot about Adoptium, and I just briefly want to touch on the kind of migration path. So it's very, very simple. If you're using adopt.openjdk.net, please change it to adoptium.net. the kind of consensus follows all the way down. So I won't bore people and read these out. But if you're using Adoptopen JDK, please migrate to Adoptium, e.g. Temurin. Please do, because Adoptopen JDK is no longer getting security updates. And that's kind of the main goal here. I want people to ensure that they're using stable builds of OpenJDK. If you're using the official Docker image, Adoptopen JDK, all you have to do to migrate is change it from Adoptopen JDK to Eclipse Temurin. The image name is compatible. It's really simple to do. And we have the same images. We have JREs, JDKs, and we also have a whole lot of documentation on how you can build essentially a bespoke runtime using JLink, which is definitely the recommended way to do things now. It allows you to have a much smaller binary runtime that most people don't need a full JRE. If you're using Homebrew like myself, just simply brew install --cask Temurin or Temurin 17, 11.8, you can specify the version there. If you are using Eclipse OpenJ9, there's certainly people that are downloading OpenJ9 builds. You now need to go to developer.ibm.com and download Semaru. It's shipped with the exact same license. It's completely free to use. It's open source again. But Adoptium can no longer provide those builds. So please do make sure that you, again, are using secure versions of OpenJ9. So I've talked a huge amount about J9 and Temurin and everything else. I just want to kind of show this slide. Adoptium is a huge community. It continues to grow. We have over, I think, 3,500 people in our Slack channel now. And so I hope that the sort of thing that people can get from this talk is there definitely is room for you. We are always looking for expertise, people that know Bash well, people that know websites, people that are good at PR. We are looking for your help. So please do get involved. As I say, the main thing is join the Adoptium Slack. The Slack channel is a brilliant feature. We pay for it. So all of the messages are kept for life. So it's a sort of knowledge bank of issues and bug support, but also a really good way to track things like our release statuses, ask questions about the community, ask about how you get involved. We also have GitHub, of course. So go to github.com/Adoptium. There's a kind of overview page there that walks you through how you would contribute. And please do give us a follow, twitter.com/Adoptium. We are always looking to gain our followers. So one last time, I put in a poll. Please do make sure you answer it. I can see answers coming in. It looks like there's kind of a 50-50 here of people that are using Temurin and Adopt, people that aren't. Please do use the chat bot. Let me know what version or distribution you are using, if it's not Temurin or Adoptium. So that's all I had for today. Thank you so much for joining my session. Apologies, I'm not quite sure what happened at the start. I don't know whether I repeated myself or whether I hadn't quite gone live in time. But hopefully everyone's found this useful and everyone's enjoyed it. And I think we're now going to open up a Q&A. I think that's correct. Let me just have a look. Yes, I think we are going to open up the Q&A. Just seeing here. I don't see any questions in the channel at the moment. So if there's any questions, please ask them now. Don't feel like you have to ask them now. I'm more than happy to answer them asynchronously. If you want to send me an email or reach out to me on Twitter. My name is gdams_, GDAMS_ on Twitter if you want to reach out to me that way, or of course ask on the Slack channel. We'll give it another couple of minutes and see if there's any questions. And do let me know what I really want to know what binary distribution of OpenJDK you're using. So just use that chat. I'll go first. I'll give it one more minute just to see if any questions come through, and if not, I will I'll wrap it there. And thank you, people, for filling in the poll. It's really good to see. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'll just put that slide back up. Please join adoptium.net/Slack. You can join the channel there, and then you can reach out to me directly or open in a public channel. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I hope you found this useful, and I hope we'll see you again in person very, very soon. Brilliant. Thanks very much, everyone.